One of the things that Canadians understand is that immigration remains an incredible strength and force for Canada and for the Canadian economy.
Canada is facing an immigration crisis. Unbalanced immigration and high yearly targets have been blamed for rising rents, increased cost of living, shortage of housing, and shortage of employment. The situation is at a point where immigration scams are causing over-immigration from some countries. Increasing public outcry has led to some changes in regulations, but critics say it's too little, too late. Hello everyone, welcome to the show. My name is Numan and I am digressing about Canadian immigration. The focus is on how immigration targets are set and how immigration scams work. The goal of this video is to provide you a total overview of the situation in the shortest amount of time possible. But before we begin, please note that any figures or claims made in this video will have their references listed in the description, so please feel free to check them out. Okay, so let's get started. Take a look at this chart made with data borrowed from Immigration Canada and Statistics Canada. The data shows yearly immigration targets beginning 1990 and ending 2026. A fixed target of 237,000 was maintained for 25 years beginning 1990. It was then increased by 60,000 in 2015. 5 years later, that target was increased by 138,000 in 2022. And from 2022 onwards, the immigration target increases every year, eventually capping at 500,000, the number we're at currently. 500,000 a year immigration target sounds like an insanely high number for a country with a population of 41 million. But why 500,000? What are the reasons for picking this number as the yearly target? Let's look at what the research has to say. In Canada and other lesser-known parts of the world, the age of 65 is considered retirement age. Canada produces about 500,000 retirees every year. And as of 2022, about 20% of Canada's population is over the age of 65. That is 7.5 million people. Now, people retiring usually means there are new job openings. In Canada's case, there are about 500,000 openings every year. Filling these openings requires a replacement. Now, even if it's an internal replacement, somewhere down the line, there is a spot open for someone new. The majority of these openings will be filled by an immigrant. Listening to that, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why we're relying on immigrants to fill the position? Surely there are a lot of qualified people in Canada. This is very good thinking, but there is a problem with that thinking. Natural population growth. Natural population growth is defined as the number of births minus the number of deaths. If the number is above 0, then the country has positive population growth. If the number is below 0, then the country has negative population growth. The problems start when a country has negative population growth. Here's what happens. The economy starts to stagnate. The infrastructure that is meant to cater to a large age range suddenly becomes an economic burden. The population itself starts to become an economic burden as it ages because the number of retirees starts increasing every year. Simply put, the country is incapable or unable to produce young people at a steady rate to replace the aging population. So this begs the question. Is Canada positive or negative? Canada right now is positive, but it is strongly trending towards negative territory. In fact, the most recent projections show that by 2030, Canada will have negative population growth. Take a look at this chart that I made with data borrowed from Statistics Canada and RBC. The chart shows yearly projection of Canada's population growth fueled by natural population growth and immigration-fueled growth. There are two immediate takeaways from this chart. Natural population growth is on a downward trend, and by 2030, which is 6 years away, we will shift to negative growth. The second takeaway is that immigration will 100% fuel population growth from 2030 onwards. With more millennials and other lesser-known generations opting to live a child-free life thanks to rising yacht prices, increased cost of living, and regular layoffs, these immigration targets start to make more sense. And if Canada has any intentions of growing its economy and remaining a country, then it needs to meet those targets every single year. But what I want to do right now is explore the impact of these targets so far. 50% of Canada's population, 20 million people, live in British Columbia and Ontario. The rest live in other lesser known parts of Canada. Vancouver and Toronto see the largest share of that 50%, and this is where the problems with these large immigration targets start. Now, Vancouver and Toronto are big cities. They have multiple universities, private colleges, and many global companies have headquarters here. A very large percentage of immigrants that are going to come to Canada will eventually live in either of these cities. The problem here is that the infrastructure is not as developed as most people think. There is, at a very basic level, a problematic relationship between supply and demand. The supply is unable to keep up with the demand that is increasing both internally and externally. This is why, right now, there is a serious housing shortage. Rents as high as $2,500 for a single bedroom, homes starting in the millions, job shortages, labor shortages, and even a maple syrup shortage. Wait a second. How can you have labor shortages and job shortages at the same time? That doesn't make any sense. The absolute brilliance of our political leadership has somehow managed to create both. Yes, we have a labor shortage despite bringing in 500,000 people a year, and we have a job shortage despite not hiring those 500,000 people. And here's why. Take a look at this chart I made with data borrowed from Statistics Canada. The chart shows labor shortages by education requirement. 46% of the shortages are in jobs that do not require a university degree, like cashiers, influencers, or politicians. The rest are in jobs that require specialized skills and training, like doctors or pilots. The reason for this is that the immigration intake, which is mostly international students at colleges and universities, they're overrepresented in business management and STEM fields and underrepresented in skilled trades and healthcare. Now, these are the areas we have a severe shortage of labor in. What's not making sense to me right now is, why is the country not adjusting the intake for what it needs? Why is it just letting anyone come inside? It would appear as if the country itself, or rather the ruling party itself, is complicit in creating these shortages. But is that really the reality, or is there more to the picture? Let's see what the research has to say. The recent discourse on Canadian immigration has shifted to how disproportionate it is in terms of race representation. There are claims that over-immigration from some countries is driven both by hype and fraud, and that it's responsible for the shortages the country is facing. Right now, on social media, the finger has been pointed at Indian origin immigrants. But seasoned veterans of social media will recall that previously it was pointed at Chinese origin immigrants. Indian origin immigrants are the largest visible minority in Canada, representing about 5.1% of the Canadian population. Chinese immigrants come in at second at around 4.7%. In 2022, 437,000 people immigrated to Canada. About 25%, or 118,000 of them, were Indian immigrants. A large percentage of that 118,000 were students coming to private colleges and universities. In fact, the desire to come to Canada is so strong that Khalsa Aid, which is an international NGO, says that many students' families, the ones that are originating from India, have taken on significant debt to support them. Here, take a look at this snippet.
The average Punjabi family will have to work 74 years, I think it is. 74 years to pay 1 year's of tuition. That's a huge amount of burden for a family to pick up, right? That's not a 25-year mortgage. That is a 74-year mortgage that you now have to pick up. All in the hopes that, maybe our child can have a better life than we do.
Those are big sacrifices, and with the requirements needed to stay in Canada increasing, most of these families will be unable to support their children after the first year. Why are students rushing to come to Canada, and why are parents sacrificing everything to send them here? Because taking advantage of people is a very profitable business. Here, let me explain. In Canada, every graduate is eligible for an open work permit called the PGWP, postgraduate work permit, provided they meet the following criteria. They graduated from a designated learning institute, DLI, which is basically a university or private colleges designated by the government to host international students, and that the graduate completed a program that was minimum 8 months in length and it led to a diploma or a degree. Now, if they meet the criteria, they get an open work permit, which basically allows them to work for any employer. The length of this permit varies between 8 months to 3 years, depending on the program the graduate completes. The PGWP also makes the holder eligible for a fast-track permanent residency provided they meet other criteria. These two reasons alone make this one of the most sought-after documents that the Government of Canada issues. So the process sort of looks something like this. Get into university, complete a program, get PGWP, get a job, and then get citizenship. This is where the scams come in. The scams promise the students admissions to a college that will get them a PGWP in the shortest amount of time possible, basically 8 months. The students and their families are lured in with promises of very high-paying jobs, higher standard of living, and permanent residency. They're also bombarded with Instagram ads showing testimonials from other students they've helped and how life is amazing in Canada. The average cost is 50,000 Canadian to secure a spot because according to the recruiters, the spots are limited and yet we still see over-enrollment in private colleges. Here, have a look at this clip.
So what happens when the focus is on numbers, numbers, numbers? This does. Last spring, hundreds of students at Alpha College were told their classes had been deferred to a later date.
On 17th of May, they sent us an official email from Alpha College, no one else. They are saying that we are unable to give you seats.
Alpha took their tuition checks, but over-enrolled beyond its capacity.
These private colleges, or diploma mills as they're more commonly known, are a popular alternative to universities and they cater specifically to international students. Getting into these private colleges is also very easy. They have far lower requirements than any university in Canada. They're also not cheap. The average per semester cost is anywhere between 7 to 12K depending on the program you're taking. And at those prices, it is in the interest of these private colleges to try and keep the students there longer than necessary. In fact, there have actually been protests from international students claiming that they have been deliberately failed so that they retake their classes, generating more revenue for the college. The diplomas and degrees from these mills focus on fields that Canada does not have a shortage in. And the graduates from these private colleges usually end up working semi-skilled to unskilled jobs because these institutions are not considered reliable by anyone. This scam is big enough that it is actually well known to the Canadian government, and in response to this, they have introduced PGWP restrictions, reduced the number of students entering the country, and increased the financial requirements to immigrate to Canada. But another scam has already picked up in response to this and has seen a big surge in interest on social media and an increase in the number of applicants. And this one is way more expensive and way more scammy. I also personally believe that this new scam, along with the student scam, are responsible for the majority of our immigration problems. Hear me out. Canada has an immigration pathway known as Labour Market Impact Assessment. The LMIA allows Canadian companies to hire foreign workers if there is no Canadian available to do the job. Scammers use this to their advantage by selling the LMIA to desperate foreign workers, promising them a good job and a PR. Majority of the time it is for a PR. The cost? The market rate is about $50,000, but they're selling them for higher. If approved, that fee goes up all the way to $80,000. And scamming the LMIA is not even that difficult. All a company needs to do is create a job listing with a fake title and an unrealistically high salary. The salary is usually kept high so that it meets income requirements for the LMIA. What happens next is that the company advertises the job in a location which the government can easily verify, like let's say a job bank. The job is then advertised for a set period of time and then an application is filed. The company applies with the evidence and then gets an approval. And once the approval is in hand, the immigrant gets an unskilled job with a fake title and an unrealistically high salary, which they will not get paid obviously, and they ride it out till PR is approved. Now, an LMIA is a closed work permit and it binds the worker to the employer. This basically means that their eligibility for PR is tied to their employment. When I was researching this scam, I came across stories of abuse where employers are essentially enslaving workers with the promise of a PR. And these workers that have spent everything to get here have no choice but to continue. There are stories of wages being withheld, no vacation time, no benefits, and given how popular this scam has become in the last 2 years, there are bound to be more cases that we will never hear about. Regardless of the immigrant's country, both the PGWP and LMIA scam are responsible for overburdening an already lagging system. The large influx of students to private colleges has driven up rents and increased the cost of tuition. Most of these private colleges do not offer programs with strong job outlooks. They're all designed to satisfy government requirements at the absolute bare minimum. The LMIA workers, on the other hand, have no recourse if they get laid off or fired. They must either find a new employer that is willing to support their LMIA application or leave the country. What happens is that some of them will try and enroll themselves in the PGWP scam by enrolling in a private college in the hopes of getting a PR. I want to briefly digress about something without going into much detail, mostly because I think everyone should know this. Canada uses a system called the CRS, which basically assesses if you're eligible for PR or not. The system takes into consideration your age, work experience, job, salary, education, and then assigns you a score. There is a clear advantage if you're younger. The problem with the student and LMIA scams is that they're pushing the score higher because of how young the new immigrants are and the quick pathways they're trying to take to get to PR. And so immigrants that graduated from legitimate universities like Simon Fraser University, UBC, or other lesser-known universities become ineligible for PR. A large majority of this is skilled labor that Canada desperately needs. Now, if the government does not address this soon, we are going to see an exodus of skilled labor, which, as we have already learned, is not really a good thing for us. Okay, you made it this far. Let's summarize everything we've learned. So far, we've learned that internal factors like an aging population, negative birth rates, bad immigration policies, and external factors like scams and fraud are responsible for high immigration targets and unbalanced immigration. Now, what this has done is create job shortages, worker shortages, rising rents, higher cost of living, and over-immigration. We also know that the government has introduced some regulations, such as decreasing the yearly targets to 375,000 for the next 2 years, increasing the requirements needed to immigrate, reducing the number of private colleges and institutions that are eligible for PGWP. But the national consensus so far is that more regulations are needed. Now, I'm not in a position to offer actual solutions, but all I can say right now is that the government needs to consider regional caps on immigration because this will force diversity and stem the number of scams. I'm sure it's easier said than done, but that's just my 2 loonies on the situation. You know, inflation. You now have a decent understanding of what's going on with Canadian immigration, and to be completely transparent with you, there really are not any other factors that are driving these numbers and creating the chaos. I highly recommend checking out the references or at least watching the documentary that's linked in the description. It does an amazing job of showing how common some of these scams are and in fact how easy these scams are. One of the reasons I recommend watching this documentary is because of how much negative sentiment there is on social media regarding Indian immigrants and immigration from India in general. And I am concerned that it's only a matter of time before this social media rhetoric starts to bleed into the real world, and we know how that usually ends up. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you sticking around. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me reach more people. On another note, the research for this video took a lot longer than I imagined, but I promise a faster turnaround for the next one. Thank you once again. Take care and have a wonderful day.